I have a non-compliant individual who has just committed an assault, requesting a second unit.
The sun was already asserting its dominance over the manicured landscape of Oak Creek, its rays glinting off the polished hoods of luxury cars and the meticulously cleaned windows of boutique storefronts. It was a Tuesday morning, a time when the wealthy suburb hummed with a quiet, purposeful energy. Nannies pushed state-of-the-art strollers along pristine sidewalks. Joggers in expensive athletic wear looped through the shaded lanes of the public park, and the air carried the faint, pleasant scent of fresh-cut grass and expensive coffee. For Officer Marcus Thorne, this was the familiar rhythm of his beat. He navigated his patrol car, a standard Ford Explorer, through streets lined with McMansions that sat on impossibly green lawns. At 28, Thorne carried himself with a maturity that belied his years. His uniform was always immaculate, the creases in his trousers sharp enough to cut, his boots polished to a mirror shine. It was a reflection not of vanity, but of a deep-seated respect for the uniform and the responsibility it represented. He had grown up in a world far removed from Oak Creek, a world where the relationship between the community and the police was frayed and often hostile. He had joined the force with a clear-eyed idealism, a belief that he could be a part of the solution, a bridge. In Oak Creek, however, his primary function often felt more like that of a well-armed property manager. He'd been on this beat for 2 years, long enough to understand its deceptive tranquility. The problems here weren't typically violent crimes or brazen robberies. They were subtler, rooted in a pervasive sense of entitlement that sometimes festered into open disdain for rules that were perceived as applying only to other people. He had dealt with belligerent teenagers in souped-up sports cars, domestic disputes in houses the size of small hotels, and endless false alarms from hypersensitive security systems. He handled it all with the same unshakable calm, a professional detachment that was his most essential piece of equipment. As he turned into the sprawling parking lot of The Grove, the area's most exclusive supermarket, he felt the familiar morning lull settle in. The lot was about half full, a mix of high-end sedans and oversized SUVs, the preferred chariots of the suburban elite. Women in yoga pants and designer sunglasses pushed carts laden with organic produce and imported cheeses. Men in polo shirts talked loudly on their phones while loading cases of sparkling water into their trunks. It was a tableau of comfortable, predictable affluence. Thorne did a slow sweep of the aisles, his eyes scanning for anything out of the ordinary. A car door left ajar, a suspicious vehicle lingering too long. But mostly, he looked for the minor infractions that could be indicative of a larger problem, or at the very least, a disruption to the carefully maintained order of things. His gaze was practiced, missing nothing. He noted the white Tesla parked perfectly between the lines, the black Range Rover whose owner was carefully placing shopping bags on a protective blanket in the cargo area. It was the small details that told the story of a place. He brought the cruiser to a near-silent stop near the front of the store, his attention drawn to a gleaming silver SUV. It was a brand-new Cadillac Escalade, the kind of vehicle that was more about status than utility, and it was parked with a breathtaking lack of consideration. Thorne sighed, a quiet exhalation of breath. It was going to be one of those days. The day was bright, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue, but a small shadow had just fallen across the sun-drenched morning in Oak Creek. He shifted the car into park, his hand already moving toward the console. The quiet rhythm of his patrol had just been broken. The Cadillac Escalade was a monument to automotive arrogance. It sat diagonally, its front right tire well over the white line of its designated space, while its rear left flank encroached significantly into the adjacent spot. That spot, marked with the bold blue and white symbol of a wheelchair, was reserved for handicapped parking. The violation was so flagrant, so unapologetically blatant, that it was almost artistic in its audacity. It wasn't just poor parking, it was a declaration. It screamed that the driver's convenience trumped rules, regulations, and the needs of others. Thorne pulled his patrol car up about 20 feet behind the SUV, parking it in a way that didn't block traffic but provided a clear view for his vehicle's dash cam. He took a moment to observe. The silver paint was so new it seemed to shimmer in the bright sunlight. The windows were tinted to an almost illegal degree of darkness, rendering the interior a complete mystery. There was no handicapped placard hanging from the rearview mirror, no special license plate, just a pristine, expensive vehicle taking up 2 prime parking spots as if it were its birthright. This was the kind of thing that could easily be ignored. He could drive on, let it be someone else's problem, or simply wait for the driver to return and leave. Some officers would. In a world of more serious crimes, a parking violation was small potatoes. But for Thorne, it was about principle. The blue lines of a handicapped spot were a social contract. They represented a collective agreement to offer a small measure of ease to those who faced daily challenges. To ignore them was to show contempt for that contract, a fraying of the civic fabric that held a community together. He believed in the broken windows theory not just for crime, but for civility. A community that tolerated small acts of disrespect would eventually find itself tolerating larger ones. He ran the license plate through the system. The vehicle was registered to a Caroline Finch, age 37, with an address in one of Oak Creek's most exclusive gated communities. No outstanding warrants, no criminal history, just a clean record attached to a very expensive piece of machinery. Thorne put on his hat, checked his reflection in the rearview mirror to ensure his tie was straight, and stepped out of the cruiser. The air was warm, and the ambient noise of the parking lot, the rattling of shopping carts, the distant beep of a car alarm being set seemed to fade as he focused on the task at hand. His footsteps were measured and steady on the hot asphalt. He didn't project aggression or intimidation. His posture was neutral, his expression calm. He was simply a professional about to do his job. As he got closer, he could see the interior of the store through its massive glass entrance. People milled about, unaware of the small drama about to unfold. He reached the driver's side of the Escalade and peered through the tinted window. He couldn't see anyone inside. He walked around the front of the vehicle, his eyes tracing the painted white lines on the pavement, confirming the obvious. The SUV was unequivocally and illegally parked. He took out his ticket book, the small, familiar rectangle of paper and carbon, a tool he'd used hundreds of times. He began to fill out the details: date, time, location, make and model of the vehicle, the specific violation codes. Each letter and number was written with precise, neat strokes. He was in the middle of writing down the license plate number when he heard the electronic chime of the supermarket's automatic doors sliding open. A moment later, he heard the distinctive click-clack of expensive heels approaching him from behind. The confrontation was about to begin. He didn't turn around immediately, choosing instead to finish writing the plate number, establishing from the outset that he was in control of the pace of this interaction. The click-clacking of heels stopped a few feet behind him. Thorne could feel a presence, an aura of indignant impatience radiating in the warm air. He deliberately took another moment to review the ticket, then turned slowly, his movements calm and economical. The woman standing before him was the physical embodiment of Oak Creek affluence. She was probably in her late 30s, with professionally highlighted blonde hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail. Her face, framed by oversized designer sunglasses, was a mask of carefully curated beauty, smooth, taut skin, expertly applied makeup. She wore a white linen blouse, tailored beige trousers, and carried a ridiculously expensive-looking leather handbag. She held a single paper grocery bag, clearly having just run in for a few items. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked. Her tone wasn't one of genuine inquiry. It was sharp, accusatory, the kind of voice used to reprimand a slow waiter or a disobedient subordinate. It was a voice that expected immediate deference. Thorne met her gaze, his own expression unreadable. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, his voice even and respectful. "This is your vehicle?" She made a show of looking at the massive Escalade as if she'd never seen it before. "Obviously. Is there a reason you're riding on that little pad of yours?" "Yes, ma'am," Thorne replied, holding the ticket book in a relaxed grip at his side. "You're parked illegally. This vehicle is occupying 2 spaces, one of which is a designated handicapped spot." He pointed with his pen to the blue markings on the pavement, partially obscured by her rear tire. The woman, Caroline Finch, followed his gesture with a glance, then dismissed the information with a dismissive wave of her free hand. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she scoffed. "The lot is half empty. Look around. I wasn't hurting anyone. I was just running in for some almond milk." Her justification was delivered as if it were a self-evident truth, as if the triviality of her errand somehow excused the violation. This was a logic Thorne had encountered before, the belief that intent, particularly one's own privileged intent, was more important than the actual rule. "That may be, ma'am," Thorne said, maintaining his polite but firm tone. "However, the law requires that these spaces be kept clear at all times for those who need them. It doesn't matter if the lot is empty or full." Caroline Finch let out an exasperated sigh, a theatrical display of frustration. "This is ridiculous. I'm a resident here. I pay an obscene amount in property taxes. Don't you people have actual criminals to catch instead of harassing hard-working taxpayers over a silly parking spot?" The phrase, "you people," hung in the air for a moment. It was a subtle but unmistakable shift, a small crack in her polished veneer through which a deeper ugliness was beginning to peek. Thorne's training kicked in, a mental switch that filtered out the personal sting and focused solely on the professional task. He had been called worse. He would be called worse again. It was just noise. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but I still need to see your driver's license, please," he said, his request unchanged, his demeanor unwavering. This simple procedural request seemed to be the final straw for her. The mask of annoyed condescension crumbled, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated outrage. Her perfectly made-up face tightened, her lips thinning into a hard line. She shifted the grocery bag in her arm, freeing her other hand. But instead of reaching for her purse to retrieve her license, she reached for something else, something that would irrevocably change the nature of this encounter. She reached for her phone. With a flick of her thumb, Carolyn Finch's phone was unlocked and the camera app was open. She raised it, the dark lens pointing directly at Officer Thorne's face, the red recording icon already blinking in the top corner. It was a gesture that had become a modern-day act of aggression, a declaration of war. "You're not getting my license," she snarled, her voice losing its earlier pretense of refinement and taking on a raw, grating edge. "You are being recorded. I am recording this harassment for my lawyer." Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't block the camera or react to the threat. His own body-worn camera was already recording, a fact he was keenly aware of. His every word, every gesture, was being documented from a perspective she couldn't control. "Ma'am, you are legally required to provide your license when requested to do so by a police officer during a lawful stop," he stated calmly. "This is a lawful stop. Your vehicle is in violation of the state's vehicle code." His recitation of the facts, delivered without emotion, seemed only to enrage her further. It was as if his professionalism was a personal insult, his refusal to be baited a challenge to her dominance. "Lawful stop! You've got to be kidding me!" she shrieked, her voice rising in pitch and volume. A few shoppers pushing carts in the distance paused, their heads turning toward the source of the commotion. "This is a power trip. You see a woman in a nice car, and you decide you're going to make her your project for the day. It's disgusting." She took a step closer, pushing the phone aggressively toward his face. "What's your name and badge number? I want your name and badge number right now. My husband is on the board of the city council, and I promise you, he will hear about this. You'll be back to writing parking tickets in the ghetto by the end of the week." The racial undertone was no longer subtle. It was now a blaring siren. The ghetto. You people. It was all part of the same toxic script. Thorne felt a familiar, weary tightening in his chest, but he forced it down. He would not give her the satisfaction of a reaction. "My name and badge number are visible on my uniform, ma'am," he said, gesturing calmly to his nameplate and the silver shield pinned above it. "Officer Thorne, badge number 724. Now, for the third and final time. I need to see your driver's license. Please." His patience was a wall she was hurling herself against, and the impact was causing her to unravel completely. Her carefully constructed persona of the elegant suburban matron was shattering, revealing something ugly and panicked underneath. "No, I will not be intimidated by you," she yelled. "You have no right. I know my rights. This is what you do, isn't it? You target people like me to meet your quotas." The accusations became more frantic, more divorced from the reality of a simple parking violation. She was no longer just a woman arguing a ticket. She was performing, casting herself as the victim in a grand drama of her own making, with her phone as the director. The scene was set, the cameras were rolling, and in her mind, she was the hero standing up to tyranny. But in the unflinching, objective lens of Officer Thorne's body camera, a very different story was being told. It was the story of a woman whose privilege had been challenged, and whose response was to ignite a fire, hoping to burn down the person who dared to challenge her. As Caroline Finch's tirade intensified, Officer Thorne retreated into his training. It was a mental fortress, built brick by brick over months at the academy and reinforced by 2 years on the street. Inside this fortress, emotion was a liability. The jeers, the insults, the racist dog whistles, they were just data points to be observed, cataloged, and responded to according to a strict set of protocols. This mental discipline was his unseen armor. "I am a citizen. I have rights," she continued to shout, her voice now drawing more significant attention. A small cluster of people had gathered at a safe distance, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern. They were the unwilling audience to her public meltdown. Thorne kept his stance relaxed but ready, his hands visible and away from his equipment belt. He maintained a steady eye contact, not to intimidate, but to show he was engaged and listening, even if her words were nonsensical venom. "Ma'am, nobody is questioning your rights," he said, his voice a low, steady counterpoint to her shrieking. "However, with those rights come responsibilities, including the responsibility to operate a vehicle in accordance with the law and to identify yourself to law enforcement when you've committed a violation. It's a very simple process." His calmness was like fuel on her fire. She seemed incapable of understanding why he wasn't yelling back, why he wasn't flustered or angry. In her world, confrontations were battles of will, and the person with the most volume and aggression usually won. Thorne was refusing to fight on her terms. He was playing a different game, one governed by rules and procedure, and it was driving her mad. "Simple process? You're making my life difficult. You're harassing me. I feel threatened," she declared, aiming the last phrase directly at the lens of her own phone, as if speaking to a future audience. "I can assure you, ma'am, no one is threatening you," Thorne replied, taking a half step back to increase the distance between them. This was a de-escalation technique, a nonverbal signal that he was not a threat. "I'm simply asking for your driver's license so I can issue you a citation for the parking violation. Once that's done, you'll be free to go." He could see the frantic thought process in her eyes. Behind the expensive sunglasses, she was cycling through options, trying to find a move that would give her back the control she felt slipping away. She had tried intimidation, veiled threats, public shaming, and playing the victim. None of it had worked. His professional composure was an impenetrable shield. He knew he had options. He could place her under arrest for failing to identify herself, but that would be a significant escalation. And his goal was always to resolve situations at the lowest possible level of force. The ticket was the objective. Her compliance was the preferred path. "Ma'am, this is your last opportunity to comply," he said, his tone shifting slightly. The politeness was still there, but it was now underpinned by a steelier edge of authority. "If you refuse to provide your license, I will be forced to take further action. Please, just give me your license so we can both move on with our day." It was a final, clear off-ramp, a chance for her to salvage the situation. He was offering her a way out of the corner she had backed herself into. But Caroline Finch was not accustomed to backing down. In her mind, to comply now would be to admit defeat, and in the sun-drenched parking lot of the Grove, in front of a growing audience and her own recording phone, defeat was not an option. Her face hardened, and she took another step forward, closing the distance he had just created. The spark of fury was about to become an inferno. The moment hung in the air, thick with tension. Thorne saw the decision solidify in Caroline's eyes. It was a reckless, self-destructive choice, born of pure frustration and a lifetime of getting her own way. Her world was one where problems were solved by raising her voice, dropping a name, or threatening a lawsuit. She was now faced with a problem that was immune to all of those tactics, and her system short-circuited. "You're not listening to me!" she screamed, her voice cracking with rage. Then she moved. It wasn't a wild swing or a premeditated attack. It was a petulant, impulsive act of physical aggression. She lunged forward and shoved him, her open palm connecting with his left shoulder. The push itself was not powerful. Thorne was a solid, well-built man, and the force barely moved him. But the physical contact was a cataclysmic shift. In that single moment, Caroline Finch had crossed a bright, uncrossable line. This was no longer about a parking ticket or failure to identify. It was no longer a verbal dispute. This was now assault on a police officer. Everything slowed down for Thorne. His training, which had kept him verbally calm, now dictated his physical response. He automatically took a step back, creating space, his hands coming up in a defensive but non-aggressive posture. The internal fortress of procedure became a real-world protocol. "Ma'am, you just assaulted a police officer," he said. His voice was devoid of anger or surprise. It was a statement of fact, cold and clear. The off-ramp he had offered her was now gone. The path ahead had narrowed to a single, inevitable conclusion. The realization of what she had done seemed to dawn on her, but not in the way one might expect. There was no flicker of regret or fear in her eyes. Instead, there was a flash of triumphant defiance. As if by making it physical, she had finally provoked the reaction she had been seeking all along. "He's attacking me!" she shrieked at her phone, which she somehow managed to keep pointed at him. "Help! Police brutality! I'm being assaulted!" It was a desperate, transparently false narrative, but she committed to it fully. Thorne knew that every second of this was being recorded on his own camera. The shove, his step back, her fabricated screams. The objective truth was being captured. He reached for the radio on his shoulder. "Dispatch, 724, he said, his voice perfectly level. I have a non-compliant individual who has just committed an assault. Requesting a second unit to my location, parking lot of the Grove, Section B4. The dispatcher's voice crackled back, calm and professional, confirming the request. Help was on the way. Caroline heard the radio call, and a flicker of genuine panic finally broke through her rage. The word assault and the call for backup were a dose of reality she couldn't ignore. But her pride wouldn't let her back down. "You're not arresting me!" she spat, her eyes darting around at the onlookers, who were now watching with a mixture of shock and apprehension. "I did not touch you. You are lying." Thorne didn't engage with her new line of defense. Arguing was pointless. The line had been crossed. His only priority now was to maintain control of the situation and wait for his partner to arrive so they could effect the arrest safely. He stood his ground, a calm center in the storm of her own making, his unseen armor holding firm against the final, desperate gusts of her fury. The click of the handcuffs was now an inevitability, a sound traveling through time to meet them in that sun-drenched parking lot. The siren was a faint, distant wail at first. Then it grew steadily louder, cutting through the ambient noise of the parking lot. It was a sound that meant different things to different people. To the shoppers, it was a signal of escalating drama. To Caroline Finch, it was the sound of her world closing in. To Officer Thorne, it was the sound of procedure, of support, of the system working as it should. A second patrol car, identical to Thorne's, swung into the parking aisle and came to a smooth stop a safe distance away. The driver's door opened and Officer Dave Reagan emerged. Reagan was older than Thorne by about 15 years, a veteran with a thick mustache and a placid demeanor that had been hardened by 2 decades on the force. He was the kind of cop who had seen everything and was surprised by nothing. Reagan took in the scene with a quick, practiced glance. He saw Thorne, standing firm and composed. He saw the woman, her face contorted in a mask of rage, still holding her phone up like a weapon. He saw the silver Escalade parked at its absurd angle. And he saw the small crowd of onlookers. He didn't rush in. He approached with a deliberate, steady pace, his eyes assessing, his presence immediately changing the dynamic of the scene. "What's going on, Marcus?" Reagan asked, his voice calm and deep. He directed the question to his partner, but kept his eyes on Caroline. "Dave," Thorne acknowledged with a slight nod. "This woman, Ms. Finch, was parked illegally in a handicapped spot. She refused to provide identification and then assaulted me by shoving me in the shoulder." Caroline immediately redirected her fury toward the newcomer. "That's a lie. He's lying. He came at me. He threatened me. I have it all on video," she shrieked, waving her phone at Reagan. Reagan ignored her outburst and looked back at Thorne, a silent question in his eyes. Thorne simply tapped his chest, indicating his body camera. Reagan nodded. He understood completely. There was an objective record. "Ma'am," Reagan said, his voice carrying an easy authority that brooked no argument. "I need you to put the phone down and place your hands behind your back." "You can't arrest me," she protested, her voice taking on a hysterical edge. "I haven't done anything wrong. This is America." Reagan sighed, a sound of profound weariness. "Ma'am, we're well past that conversation. You've been given a lawful order. You can comply now, or we can make you comply. The outcome will be the same, but one way is a lot more dignified for everyone involved." He and Thorne moved to flank her, their movements coordinated and precise, a practiced dance they had done many times before. They didn't rush. They simply closed the space, leaving her with no room to maneuver. The sight of the 2 uniformed officers, both calm, both resolute, seemed to finally pierce her bubble of self-righteous fury. The fight began to drain out of her, replaced by a dawning, terrifying understanding of the consequences of her actions. Her shoulders slumped. The hand holding the phone dropped to her side. The angry tirade dissolved into a choked sob. "This is a mistake," she whimpered, the words barely audible. "You're making a huge mistake." "The mistake was made when you put your hands on my partner," Reagan said, his voice not unkind, but utterly firm. He gently took her arm. "Hands behind your back, please." With the arrival of Reagan, the chaos had been contained. His calm, experienced presence had provided the final element needed to bring the situation to its lawful conclusion. The storm had passed, and now, the methodical process of cleaning up the wreckage was about to begin. Officer Thorne unhooked the handcuffs from his belt. The metallic rasp of the chain was unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. Caroline Finch stood frozen between the two officers, her face a pale picture of disbelief. The torrent of rage had ceased, leaving behind a vacuum filled with the stark reality of her situation. Reagan held her arms gently but firmly behind her back. Thorne brought the first cuff around her right wrist. The mechanism clicked shut with a definitive, final sound. He then secured the second cuff around her left wrist. It was done. Caroline Finch, resident of Oak Creek's most exclusive enclave, owner of a brand new Escalade, was under arrest. She flinched as the cold metal touched her skin. A genuine sob escaped her lips, a sound of pure, undiluted panic. "Please," she whispered, the fight completely gone from her voice. "Please, don't do this. My children." "You should have thought of that before, ma'am," Reagan said quietly, his voice lacking any hint of vindictiveness. He was simply stating a fact. Thorne began the standard pat-down, a quick professional search for weapons or contraband. As his hands moved over the expensive fabric of her blouse and trousers, he could feel her trembling. The woman who had, minutes before, been a pillar of arrogant fury was now just a frightened, defeated person. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a profound sense of weary professionalism. This was the unfortunate but necessary outcome of her choices. He recited the Miranda rights from memory, his voice clear and steady in the hushed parking lot. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand these rights as I have read them to you?" She gave a weak, jerky nod, tears now streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. The oversized sunglasses had been knocked askew during the arrest, revealing eyes wide with terror. The crowd of onlookers began to disperse, their morbid curiosity satisfied. The show was over. They returned to their cars and their shopping, the brief, ugly drama already becoming an anecdote they would share over dinner. Reagan led Caroline toward the back of his patrol car. As she walked, her expensive heels seemed unsteady on the rough asphalt. She looked small and vulnerable, a stark contrast to the imposing figure she had tried to project just moments earlier. Reagan opened the door, and she ducked inside, folding herself into the hard plastic of the back seat. The door closed with a solid thud, sealing her inside. Thorne picked up her fallen phone from the pavement. The screen was cracked. He then retrieved her purse and the single bag of groceries from beside her Escalade. Evidence and personal property, to be logged and secured. He placed them in the passenger seat of his own vehicle. He and Reagan exchanged a brief look over the roof of the patrol car. No words were needed. They were both professionals who had done a difficult job by the book. Thorne would handle the impound of the Escalade, and Reagan would transport the prisoner to the precinct for processing. Thorne was left alone in the parking spot, standing next to the gleaming silver monument to arrogance that had started it all. The sun was still bright. The day was still beautiful, but the atmosphere felt heavy. The silence that had descended was profound. It was the weight of consequences, the quiet aftermath of a self-immolation. All that remained was the paperwork. Back at the Oak Creek Police Department precinct, the air was cool and smelled faintly of industrial-grade coffee and disinfectant. The chaotic energy of the parking lot had been replaced by the quiet, methodical hum of bureaucracy. For Thorne, this part of the job was just as critical as the confrontation itself. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the focused calm required for the most important battle, the one that would be fought on paper. He sat at his designated cubicle, the body camera docked and uploading its footage to the secure server. On his computer screen was a blank incident report form, a digital canvas waiting to be filled with the unassailable facts of the case. He knew the video was the star witness, an objective, unblinking eye that had captured every word, every action. But the report was the narrative that would frame that evidence. It had to be precise, detailed, and stripped of all emotion. He began to type, his fingers moving methodically across the keyboard. Incident type: 240 PC, assault on a peace officer. 148 A, 1 PC, resisting/obstructing a peace officer. 5290 CVC, handicapped parking violation. 12500 A, CVC, failure to present a driver's license. He chronicled the events in a linear, dispassionate sequence. He started with the time he first observed the silver Cadillac Escalade, noting its exact position across the lines of the standard and handicapped spaces. He included the license plate number and the results of the initial check, which identified the owner as Caroline Finch. He detailed his initial approach, his first words to Ms. Finch, and her immediate hostile reaction. He transcribed her key phrases as accurately as he could remember, quoting her threats about her husband's position on the city council and her derogatory, racially charged remarks. He was careful to present these not as personal insults, but as factual elements of the encounter, relevant to her state of mind and her escalating aggression. He noted her refusal to provide her license upon his 3 separate, polite requests. The critical moment, the shove, was described with clinical precision. Suspect Finch then closed the distance between us and used her right open palm to forcefully shove this officer's left shoulder, causing me to take an involuntary step backward. He did not write "she angrily shoved me" or "she violently attacked me." He used neutral, objective language that the video would corroborate perfectly. The facts, unadorned, were damning enough. He documented his call for backup, the arrival of Officer Reagan, their coordinated commands, and the eventual arrest. He listed the time the Miranda rights were read and her non-verbal acknowledgement. Every detail, no matter how small, was included. The cracked screen of her phone, the contents of her purse, the single bag of groceries, it all went into the report. He spent nearly 2 hours on the document, reading and rereading every sentence, ensuring there were no typos, no grammatical errors, no ambiguous phrases that a clever defense attorney could twist or exploit. This was his testimony, frozen in black and white. While the video showed what happened, the report explained the why behind his actions, why he approached the vehicle, why he asked for her license, why he called for backup, and why he ultimately made the arrest. It was a justification of his professionalism, a preemptive defense against the inevitable accusations of bias or misconduct that he knew would come. When he finally submitted the report, he leaned back in his chair and rolled his shoulders, feeling the tension of the last few hours. The digital file was now part of the official record, a permanent chronicle of Caroline Finch's very bad day. He knew the process was just beginning. There would be court dates, hearings, and endless legal maneuvering. But his part in the initial drama was over. He had done his job, and he had documented it flawlessly. Now, it was up to the system. In the modern age, events do not stay contained. They leak, they spread, and they catch fire in the vast, interconnected ecosystem of the Internet. The Oak Creek Police Department, facing a high-profile arrest of a socially prominent resident and anticipating accusations of misconduct from her powerful husband, made a proactive decision within 48 hours in the interest of transparency. They released a carefully edited portion of Officer Thorne's body camera footage. The video was electric. It began with the calm, polite interaction, Thorne's steady voice explaining the violation. Then came Caroline Finch's escalating anger, her voice dripping with condescension and privilege. Viewers saw her pull out her phone, heard her threats, her racist remarks, and her hysterical, false claims of being attacked. And then they saw the moment that sealed her fate, the clear, undeniable shove to Thorne's shoulder. The video ended with the calm arrival of Officer Reagan and the quiet, professional arrest. The clip, just under 3 minutes long, was uploaded to the department's official YouTube and social media channels. At first, it was viewed by local news outlets and community watchdogs. Then, it was picked up by a larger regional news station. From there, it went national. By the end of the day, it was everywhere. It became a viral phenomenon, a digital parable for the modern era. News aggregators gave it clickbait headlines. Karen's ultimate meltdown. Watch entitled woman assault a cop over a parking spot. Officer's incredible calm in the face of racist rage. The court of public opinion delivered its verdict with swift and brutal efficiency. Millions of people watched the footage, sharing it with their own commentary. Officer Thorne was lauded as a hero, a model of restraint and professionalism. His unflappable demeanor, his refusal to be provoked, his by-the-book adherence to procedure in the face of extreme provocation became the subject of widespread admiration. Police reform advocates and law enforcement supporters alike pointed to him as an example of how de-escalation should work. Caroline Finch, on the other hand, was universally condemned. She became an internet caricature, the embodiment of a specific type of white, privileged arrogance. Her face was plastered everywhere, memes were created, her words were remixed into songs. Amateur sleuths on social media quickly uncovered her identity, her address, the name of her husband's company, and the private schools her children attended. The incident was no longer a local police matter in Oak Creek. It had become a national talking point, a flashpoint in the ongoing cultural conversations about race, class, privilege, and policing. Talk shows discussed it. Pundits debated it. Every corner of the internet seemed to have an opinion. For Thorne, watching from the sidelines, the experience was surreal. He saw his own face on the evening news, heard his own voice dissected by analysts. He was intensely private, a man who took pride in quiet competence, and he found the sudden, glaring spotlight deeply uncomfortable. He had just been doing his job. He hadn't asked for any of this. The body camera, a tool designed for accountability and evidence, had transformed a routine encounter into a global spectacle. It had broadcast the truth, but in doing so, it had unleashed a force of public scrutiny that was as powerful and uncontrollable as a wildfire. The footage had vindicated him completely, but it had also stolen his anonymity, turning him from an ordinary police officer into a public symbol. The consequences for Caroline Finch were just beginning, but Thorne was about to discover that in the world of viral fame, there are no innocent bystanders. Caroline Finch spent 12 hours in a holding cell before her husband, a man whose influence was considerable but not limitless, managed to arrange for a high-powered attorney and post her bail. She emerged from the county jail feeling dazed and humiliated, wrapped in the borrowed dignity of her lawyer's expensive suit jacket. She expected to return to her gated community, to the sanctuary of her meticulously decorated home, and begin the process of making this whole ugly incident disappear. She was wrong. The world she stepped back into was not the one she had left. The first sign was her phone. When she finally got it back, it was a useless brick, overwhelmed by a ceaseless flood of notifications, texts, emails, social media alerts, all pouring in at an impossible rate. When she finally managed to glimpse her social media pages, she saw a tidal wave of hatred, thousands of comments from strangers, calling her vile names, dissecting her character, threatening her and her family. Her carefully curated online life, a gallery of smiling family vacations and charitable galas, had been vandalized with the digital equivalent of spray paint. She quickly discovered her address and phone number had been posted online. The landline at her home rang incessantly. Cars she didn't recognize drove slowly past her house, their occupants sometimes shouting insults or holding up their phones to record. The gilded cage of her community, once a symbol of exclusion and security, now felt like a trap. The professional consequences were just as swift. The prestigious interior design firm where she was a senior partner called an emergency board meeting. By the end of the day, a press release was issued announcing that Caroline Finch had been indefinitely suspended pending an internal review. The firm, which catered to an elite image-conscious clientele, could not afford to be associated with her brand of public toxicity. Her career, built over 15 years, had evaporated in a single afternoon. The social fallout was perhaps the most painful. The charity board she sat on requested her immediate resignation. The Parent-Teacher Association at her children's private school sent a delicately worded email suggesting it would be best if she didn't volunteer for any upcoming events. Invitations to parties were quietly rescinded. Friends she had known for years suddenly stopped answering her calls. She had become a pariah, a social leper. Her status, the currency she had traded on her entire adult life, was now worthless. Her husband, a man accustomed to solving problems with money and connections, found himself powerless. He was furious with her, not just for her actions, but for the public humiliation she had brought upon their family. Their pristine home, once a place of comfort, was now thick with a tense, suffocating silence, punctuated by bitter arguments. Caroline Finch found herself in a state of shock, unable to process the speed and totality of her downfall. In her own mind, she was still the victim. She had been having a bad day. The officer had been rude, inflexible. She had been provoked. She tried to cling to this narrative, but it crumbled against the stark reality of the video that everyone had seen. There was no ambiguity, no room for her to spin the story. The world had seen who she was in that moment of pressure, and they had judged her for it. The life she had known was over, not because of a police officer or a parking ticket, but because of an ugliness within herself that she had allowed to boil over in the most public way imaginable. While Caroline Finch's world was imploding, Officer Marcus Thorne's was expanding in ways he neither wanted nor expected. The department, pleased with the positive publicity, officially commended him for his exemplary professionalism and restraint under duress. The chief of police held a press conference where he praised Thorne as a model for the entire force. His face was on the front page of the local paper, under headlines that called him a community hero. The attention was relentless. When he walked into a coffee shop, people would recognize him. Some would stop him to shake his hand and thank him for his service. Others would just stare, whispering to their companions. He received letters and emails at the precinct from all over the country, praising his composure. A local restaurant offered him free meals for a year. While the support was gratifying, it was also deeply unsettling. Thorne had never sought the spotlight. He was a man who found satisfaction in doing his job well, not in being praised for it. He felt like an imposter, a symbol onto which people were projecting their own ideas about what a good cop should be. He had simply followed his training. He had done what was expected of him. In his mind, there was nothing heroic about it. The label of hero also came with a heavy burden. It created an impossibly high standard. He felt as though his every move, both on and off duty, was now under a microscope. A minor mistake, a moment of impatience, any deviation from the perfect, stoic image the public now held of him, could be seen as a betrayal. He was no longer just Officer Thorne. He was that cop from the video. And the role was exhausting to play. There was a darker side to the fame as well. While the majority of the feedback was positive, he also became a target. He received anonymous threats from extremist groups who accused him of being a traitor or a part of a conspiracy. His personal information, like Caroline's, was leaked onto dark corners of the internet. The department took the threats seriously, advising him to be extra vigilant, to vary his routines, to check under his car. The sense of safety and anonymity he had once taken for granted was gone. His colleagues at the precinct treated him differently. Some were genuinely proud of him. Others displayed a subtle resentment, a jealousy of his newfound fame. The easy camaraderie of the locker room was replaced with a new awareness. Jokes that once would have been harmless now felt loaded. He felt a sense of isolation creeping in, even when surrounded by his fellow officers. He found himself replaying the incident in his mind, not with pride, but with a kind of weary analysis. He had won the confrontation, but the victory felt hollow. He had successfully de-escalated a situation with a single individual, only to find himself at the center of a national firestorm. He had wanted to be a police officer, not a celebrity. He had wanted to serve his community, not become a meme. The viral video had vindicated his actions, but in the process, it had cost him his peace of mind, proving that even when you do everything right, the job can still take a part of you that you can never get back. Officer Dave Reagan watched the saga unfold from a unique vantage point. He had been a cop long enough to see the profession change, to see technology like body cameras and social media alter the very nature of the job. For him, the viral video wasn't a spectacle. It was a confirmation of what he already knew about his partner. Reagan had been paired with Thorne for occasional shifts over the past year. He had been immediately impressed. The kid was squared away, smart, and had a temperament that was perfectly suited for the job. He was calm when others were agitated, thoughtful when others were impulsive. Reagan, a man who valued quiet competence over bravado, saw Thorne as the future of good policing. When he had arrived at the scene in the parking lot, he hadn't seen a hero in the making or a viral moment waiting to happen. He had seen his partner, outnumbered by a hostile subject, maintaining tactical composure. He had seen the situation for what it was, a routine call that had gone sideways because of the suspect's belligerence. His job was simple: support his partner, ensure officer safety, and help bring the incident to a close. In the days that followed, as the video took on a life of its own, Reagan found himself talking to Internal Affairs, the district attorney's office, and his superiors. His account was always the same: a dry, factual corroboration of the video's evidence. "Yeah, that's Marcus," he told the DA's investigator over the phone. "What you see on that tape is what you get. He's got a long fuse. Never seen him lose his cool." He watched with a cynical eye as the media built Thorne up into a symbol. He knew how fickle the public and the press could be. Today's hero was tomorrow's goat. He worried about the effect the sudden fame would have on the young officer. He'd seen it before, cops who got a taste of the spotlight and started believing their own press clippings. They became arrogant, took risks, and eventually, they made a mistake. He made a point to check in on Thorne. He found him in the break room, staring into a cup of coffee as if it held the secrets of the universe. "You holding up, kid?" Reagan asked, sitting down across from him. Thorne looked up, his eyes weary. "It's a lot, Dave." "I know," Reagan said, taking a sip of his own coffee. "They build you up just so they have something to tear down later. Don't read the comments. Don't watch the news. Just keep your head down and do the job. This'll all blow over." Reagan's perspective was the grounding force Thorne needed. He hadn't just witnessed the event, he understood the context. He knew that for every incident that gets captured on video, there are 1,000 others that don't. He knew that the quiet, day-to-day grind of police work, the endless reports, the mundane calls, the moments of quiet compassion that no one ever sees, was the true measure of a cop. The incident at the Grove served as a stark reminder for Reagan of why he respected his partner so much. It wasn't just about the single, dramatic event. It was about Thorne's character, his unwavering commitment to doing the job the right way, even when it was difficult, even when he was being provoked, even when no one was watching. Though now, it seemed, the whole world was. And from Reagan's perspective, they were finally seeing what he had seen all along, a damn good cop. Once the initial explosion of public outrage faded and the news cycle moved on to its next fleeting obsession, the case of Caroline Finch settled into the slow, impersonal grind of the legal system. The viral video that had convicted her in the court of public opinion now became Exhibit A in a methodical, bureaucratic process. The district attorney's office, buoyed by the overwhelming evidence and intense public scrutiny, pursued the case vigorously. They assigned a sharp, no-nonsense prosecutor named EDSA Vance to handle it. Vance had seen the video, read Thorne's meticulously detailed report, and knew this was as close to a slam dunk as a case could get. Caroline's husband hired a legal team that cost more than Thorne made in 5 years. Her lead counsel was a slick, well-known defense attorney named Mitchell Croft, who specialized in damage control for the wealthy and well-connected. Croft's initial strategy was to try and get the charges dismissed, arguing that Officer Thorne had instigated the confrontation and that Caroline had felt threatened. It was a complete failure. During a pre-trial hearing, Prosecutor Vance played the body camera footage for the judge. She played it without commentary, letting the video speak for itself. She would pause it at key moments. Thorne's polite requests for a license, Caroline's escalating verbal abuse, her racist insults, and finally, the crystal-clear, undeniable image of her hand shoving Thorne's shoulder. Croft's arguments about his client feeling threatened evaporated in the face of the visual evidence. The judge, a stern, experienced woman, looked down from the bench with an expression of undisguised disapproval. "Mr. Croft," the judge said, her voice dripping with impatience, "your client was illegally parked. She was hostile and non-compliant from the first moment of interaction. She refused multiple lawful orders to identify herself. And then she physically assaulted a police officer. What, exactly, do you expect me to do with this motion to dismiss?" The motion was denied, forced to face the reality that a trial would be a public relations disaster. Croft shifted tactics. He began negotiating a plea bargain. The process dragged on for weeks. Croft argued for a minimal sentence, perhaps just probation and an anger management class, citing Caroline's previously clean record and the immense public humiliation she had already suffered. Prosecutor Vance held firm. She argued that an assault on a police officer, especially one so brazen and clearly documented, required a meaningful consequence. This wasn't just about Caroline Finch. It was about sending a message that such behavior was unacceptable, regardless of one's wealth or social standing. Thorne was kept informed of the proceedings but remained largely on the periphery. He had to give a deposition, where he sat for hours while Croft's legal team asked him pointed, repetitive questions, trying to find any inconsistency in his account. But Thorne's story never wavered. It was the same story he had written in his report, the same story the video told. He was a calm, factual witness. Ultimately, a deal was struck. To avoid the spectacle of a trial and the certainty of a conviction, Caroline Finch agreed to plead guilty to one misdemeanor count of assault on a peace officer and one count of resisting arrest. The other charges would be dropped. The impersonal gears of justice had turned, grinding down her arrogance, her lies, and her privilege into a simple, undeniable entry in a court docket: guilty. Months had passed. The seasons had begun to turn, and the intense heat of the media spotlight had cooled. Officer Thorne was back on his regular beat. The familiar rhythm of patrol, a welcome antidote to the surreal chaos of his brief, unwanted fame. The world had largely moved on, but the incident had left its mark, an invisible scar on his professional psyche. He was more cautious now, more aware of the invisible cameras everywhere, not just the one on his chest, but the countless phones in the hands of every citizen he interacted with. He felt a new layer of pressure in every traffic stop, every encounter. He found himself choosing his words with even more care, his actions even more deliberate, knowing that any moment could be taken out of context and broadcast to the world. The incident had reinforced the importance of his professionalism, but it had also stolen some of the ease, the natural human connection that was so vital to community policing. Driving through the parking lot of the Grove still felt different. He would often glance at Section B4, the ghost of the silver Escalade seeming to linger in the spot. He saw the faces of the people of Oak Creek differently, too. Some still recognized him, offering a respectful nod or a small smile. But in the eyes of others, he saw a flicker of something else: apprehension, perhaps, or resentment. He was no longer just a cop. He was a reminder of a moment of ugliness that the wealthy, image-conscious community would prefer to forget. Yet, for all the new burdens, the experience had also brought an unexpected affirmation of his purpose. One afternoon, he responded to a call about a minor car accident in a residential neighborhood. A young mother had backed her minivan into a neighbor's parked car. Both parties were agitated. On the verge of a shouting match, Thorne arrived and immediately lowered the temperature. He spoke to both drivers separately, his voice calm and reassuring. He listened patiently to their conflicting stories, treating both with equal respect. He explained the process of exchanging insurance information, answered their questions, and in 10 minutes had transformed a hostile confrontation into a civil, if begrudging, resolution. As he was leaving, the young mother stopped him. "Officer," she said, "I know who you are. I saw that video. The way you handled that, and the way you handled this today, it makes me feel safer knowing people like you are out here. Thank you." Her words cut through the cynicism and weariness that had started to creep into his heart. She hadn't seen a symbol or a celebrity. She had seen a competent, professional police officer doing his job well, and it had made a positive difference in her day. That was it. That was the core of it. It wasn't about fame or public opinion. It was about those small, individual moments. It was about bringing order to chaos, calm to conflict, and fairness to a world that often lacked it. The incident with Caroline Finch had been a trial by fire, a test of his deepest principles. He had been scarred by it, yes, but he had also emerged from it with a harder, clearer understanding of who he was and why he wore the badge. He was a peace officer, and as he pulled back onto the sun-dappled streets of Oak Creek, he felt a renewed sense of commitment to that simple, profound truth. The final court date was a formality, an anticlimax to a drama that had played out on a national stage. Caroline Finch stood before the judge, a diminished figure in a conservative gray suit. She read from a prepared statement, her voice quiet and strained, apologizing to Officer Thorne and the community for her behavior. Thorne was not required to be there, and he had chosen not to be. He had no interest in seeing her humbled. He only wanted the legal process to be complete. The judge accepted the plea bargain. Caroline Finch was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, a mandatory anger management course, and a substantial fine. She was also ordered to write a formal letter of apology to Officer Thorne. She would have no jail time, but she would have a permanent criminal record. The gleaming Escalade had been replaced by a more modest sedan. Her high-powered career was gone, and her social standing was in tatters. The consequences, though not what some on the internet had called for, were real and life-altering. The legal system had worked, albeit slowly and imperfectly. As the dust finally settled, the lessons of the encounter resonated, extending far beyond a single parking lot in an affluent suburb. The incident became a case study in police academies and a talking point in community meetings, a stark illustration of the high cost of disrespect. It revealed the volatile chemistry of privilege, rage, and racial tension that simmers just beneath the surface of modern American life, and the critical importance of professionalism in preventing it from boiling over. It was a story about how a single, routine interaction can become a flashpoint, and how the armor of procedure and de-escalation is an officer's most vital shield. Ultimately, the story of Officer Thorne and Caroline Finch was not just about a cop and a Karen. It was a reflection on the deeper fractures in society. Caroline's rage did not spring from a vacuum. It was likely the product of a life lived in a bubble of privilege, where her sense of self-worth was so fragile that a minor challenge to her authority, a black police officer telling her she was wrong, felt like a fundamental threat to her identity. Perhaps her life, for all its external polish, was filled with unseen pressures and insecurities. Perhaps she felt a profound lack of control in other areas of her life, and the parking lot became the one place she thought she could assert absolute dominance. Her actions weren't an excuse, but a symptom of a deeper malaise, an inability to see the humanity and authority in someone who didn't look like her. Could Thorne have done anything differently to protect himself better? Perhaps if he had waited for a partner before the initial approach, the dynamic might have changed, but that wasn't standard procedure for a parking violation. What if he had matched her anger with his own? The situation would have undoubtedly escalated. The video would have told a different story, and his career could have been jeopardized, regardless of who was in the right. His unwavering calm was not just a tactic. It was his only viable defense. His adherence to the rules was what ultimately protected him from a system that can be unforgiving. He proved that true strength in his line of work isn't about physical force, but about an unassailable moral and procedural high ground. The core message of this encounter is one of fundamental human dignity. It teaches us that respect is not a commodity to be given only to those we deem worthy. It is a baseline requirement of a functioning civil society. The uniform and the badge grant authority, but it is the person within who must earn trust through fairness and restraint. Conversely, a citizen's rights do not include the right to dehumanize, insult, or assault those sworn to protect them. In the end, a simple parking ticket cost Caroline Finch her reputation, her career, and her peace of mind. But the real price was paid for her profound lack of respect for the law, for the officer, and ultimately for the basic social contract that binds us all together. What do you think is the root cause of such explosive reactions to minor challenges of authority? How can we better foster a culture of mutual respect between law enforcement and the communities they serve? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And please support the channel if you appreciate these stories.